Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
The pod bay doors are open for this special edition commemorating the life and times of the Hef. Playboy founder, entrepreneur, especial, Hugh Hefner, who passed away Thursday, September 27th, 2017, at the ripe old age of 91. I am Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, along with my omnipresent co-host, Jerry Dean Roberts, of ArmchairCinema.com and ArmchairOscars.com. Hello, Jerry.
Hello. Excited as always to be here.
It's regrettable that we have to come together for this kind of a thing, though. Most people might wonder why two movie guys are paying tribute to Hugh Hefner, but also remember, if you drop out the movie, we're two guys.
Yeah.
And
Just two guys.
Hugh Hefner has been a large part of guys' lives since, when did Playboy debut? 1956?
1953.
1953. So, there's not a person who is over the age of 30 that didn't find the stacks of Playboys either at the friend's house or at your own house, your dad's stash, or what have you.
You've seen it somewhere, whether you wanted to or not.
Exactly.
It's been somewhere.
And he was massively influential, and he personified a lifestyle that is obviously not for everyone, but one that, some people think that they would want to aspire to. The swinger who never really has to grow up and never really has to settle down for a woman his own age, or the rich guy that has a party all the time with scantily clad or unclad women, beautiful women just all over his house at any time of the day or night.
Fantasy lifestyle.
Fantasy lifestyle, walking around in silk pajamas and a silk smoking jacket that, that's your basic uniform unless you're going out to something.
You have a mansion. You have a gigantic palace-like mansion, beautiful women all over the place, and your front doorbell has a plaque on it that says, "If you don't swing, don't bother to ring."
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, that's fantasy.
I mean, and he's been the topic of countless documentaries tracking his life and his the beginning and of the Playboy empire, that started off as a little magazine called, you said, Stag Party.
It was going to be called Stag Party.
But because of a hunting magazine already called Stag, they changed it to avoid a lawsuit, and it became Playboy, and it revolutionized the publishing industry. It changed what magazines could do. It changed how much magazines would sell. It
really came about because of I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
It came about because of a revolutionary shift. When the Second World War ended, one of the most popular men's magazines was Esquire, which promoted very much a party lifestyle.
Right.
And promoted the freedom of men to move about and have dates and have the confidence to go out with beautiful women and that kind of thing. And one of the things is there was a shift in the culture as we entered the 50s, in which everything became halcyon, everything became conservative.
Right.
There was a very oppressive mood in the country.
The Eisenhower era was not a very liberated time.
right, and it was more acceptable to live the Ozzie and Harriet lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's the irony of Playboy is that he managed to get it off the ground and get it published at a time when television had married couples sleeping in separate beds.
Right, and you couldn't say the word pregnant.
You
And
couldn't. And if you were single, you lived alone in your own apartment.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he really was what launched Playboy for him was this idea that it was a repressive society, and
Right.
also at the time, you move ahead a few years, Esquire had become um, clean.
Mm-hmm.
It had had an overhaul. It had become bland, boring articles with writers, blah
Mm-hmm.
blah blah. It wasn't there wasn't the excitement with it. And you have to understand how influential at the time Esquire was because at the time almost every men's magazine was about hunting and fishing.
Right, 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 right.
You know,
But here comes Esquire about lifestyle and clothes
right?
and
Men's
hairstyles and
lifestyle.
right men's lifestyle. And despite what the movies would tell you because of the strict production code, the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s were not this chaste. Sex wasn't invented in the mid 60s.
No,
Uh, a friend of mine was fond of saying, sex didn't exist until 1967. Uh, until then, we procreated in a different fashion. Um,
yeah,
so I mean, there was unwed sex. There was, I mean, if you look at some of the more daring pictures way back, especially Alfred Hitchcock or the films noir of post-war America, there is allusion to without specifically saying that unmarried couples were sleeping together. And there was this people think, oh well, that is not then, but then Playboy comes out 53, and it's basically encouraging people to move on from the pinups. It's not just lingerie clad girls, Betty Page, and that kind of stuff that they're still clothed, but not especially. These women were nude,
hmm
and it's encouraging what.
but it's based on pinup photography.
Right, 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 right,
The idea he said was it was the girl next door.
right.
The idea that nice girls like sex too.
Mm-hmm. And to
That these
make
were not nasty, dirty girls who were just doing awful things.
right, and they were shot in a very professional, clean environment. Houses, beds, couches, bearskin rugs.
And here's the thing. Here's the key to that. It stayed that way,
It did. It did for decades, and
and it's still
recently,
it's still that way.
right? Recently, they tried to go publish non-nude
hmm
for the first time ever. That lasted
That
about
didn't.
6 months, if that, and they
We
went
already
right back
have
to
that. It's
their
called Maxim.
right. They went right back to their old formula, and it, the thing about Playboy is that it evolved from just the attractive naked women to being a cultural icon where the Playboy interview was a
Yeah.
coveted thing. People started to do celebrities started to do very in-depth intellectual interviews with Playboy writers. The spot of Playboy film reviewer was very coveted, still kind of is. The when people say I just read it for the articles, that's almost
Sometimes they did.
believable. It's almost believable because the articles are really good. You don't just read it for the articles, but you read it. You can read the articles when you're not using it for other purposes.
He could have created just a girly magazine
Yeah.
with just pictures and pictures and pictures of naked girls. What he did was he created the Playboy philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
which was the idea that a guy could have the lifestyle he wanted,
Right.
that wasn't locked into being married to the same woman, coming home every day, 9 to 5. He could have a party when he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this does not sit well with a lot of people,
No.
but it was especially at the time, because there were obscenity laws.
Yes.
This does not sit well. And the thing is, he created this philosophy, but he also wanted it to be a magazine for intellectuals.
Mm-hmm.
So he got Norman Mailer and he got all of these other writers
Mm-hmm.
to submit articles so that it was
And stories,
in
original
stories.
stories from
Truman
well-known
Capote.
writers. Yeah.
I mean, and it was not. The only thing that really soured it was what came along during the '60s and sexual revolution,
Right.
which became Penthouse, which became
Mm-hmm.
Hustler, which became, all of these other things, which were sex magazines.
Yes. Yes.
And Playboy and Hefner kept his magazine out of that light.
Right.
And meanwhile, he's creating an empire,
Mm-hmm.
which includes at the time a television network,
Yeah.
a movie studio,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, the Playboy clubs, all of this. He's creating built on this idea, but he never ever gave himself, or never, if you were really looking, never cast himself as this scummy pornographer.
No, he always
He was just
presented
a
an
man.
image of class. Right. He
Yes,
always, because I mean, he could have gone around in just these little underpants, but no, silk pajamas, a silk smoking jacket.
married
Uh,
to a gorgeous woman.
yes, typically, always.
Now you have to know, Hugh Hefner was born into a Methodist family
Hmm.
that did not believe in touching. They didn't believe in kissing. They didn't believe in embracing. They didn't hug. They didn't do any of that.
So it's a miracle he was born at all.
Right. So it was a miracle he was born at all, and it's a miracle that he managed to create something that would encourage
Hmm.
a more physical lifestyle in a society that seemed determined to move against it.
Hmm.
And so his magazine, now I want to say this because I know that a lot of people are just repulsed by the idea of Playboy, of what he created. There has always been a knee-jerk reaction to Playboy, whether you approve of its content or not.
Right.
I mean, everybody knows what it is. Everybody has an opinion about it,
Hmm.
and but this goes to prove what a difficult and complex cultural phenomenon that he managed to create and that he managed to put on the American culture. Brought to you by a man who spent 60 years practicing what he preached.
Oh, yes.
He lived it.
Hmm.
He didn't just throw it out there. But he never seemed to be a scumbag. He never seemed
Right.
to be, just skirt chasing and all of this. He seemed to be a guy who knew what he was doing. Again, like you said, a man um, who a man who had class
Hmm.
and sold that lifestyle.
Right.
And he was promoting the party lifestyle, the free love movement. Um, as I said, in a time in history when you didn't do things like that.
Right.
But as I've always said, and I said to you off mic, people don't want to be told what to do.
Right.
So in that sense, I think that Hugh Hefner was very much like the people of his time. He was very much like Elvis,
Yeah.
very much um, like uh, Lenny Bruce,
Hmm. Hmm.
very much like any of these who wanted to revolutionize and wanted to change the society and relax the attitude that everything has to be a
Right.
two-car garage and a picket fence and you know mom and dad and the kids, and give you the lifestyle that you want rather than the one you are demanded to have.
Right. 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 And to play off of that, I mean, you brought up Lenny Bruce, who even in the '60s was arrested under obscenity laws
Yes.
because in public, and I have a live record of his after the
So do I.
obscenity trial started, and he's just talking about the judge and the trial and all these things that you wouldn't really think would be in a comedy routine, but they're hilarious. He was arrested in, I think, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for saying, pardon me, cocksucker
Hmm.
in public, on stage. He was arrested for that.
Yeah.
So when you think about, even now, you go to a PG-13 movie,
Hmm.
the level of things that they're allowed to say and the level of things that people were being arrested for in the mid 60s, 12 years after Playboy started. First, just showing kind of topless and butts and moving on to Bush. And,
Hmm.
you know, the alternative to the, like I told you, the alternative to the boys finding the National Geographics on the African tribes that had
Tribal women
had the
without tops.
right, and it's really amazing that he not only survived but flourished
Hmm.
and wasn't incarcerated.
No. Well, he did go to trial
He
several
went to
times,
trial.
and
He didn't get incarcerated.
right.
He was
But
sued, not arrested.
it was always, and I've made this argument several times. I believe that the women who posed for his magazine did not have a gun to their head
No.
and had the ability to say no,
Mm-hmm.
and um, but in the sense was always promoting the idea that a woman can enjoy sex too.
Right. And
Um,
the
his
funny thing is,
images would promote it, and I know a lot of people would disagree with me about this, but the women in his magazine were suggesting that women can be a part of sex as well
mm-hmm.
without feeling dirty,
Right,
without feeling like they're doing
right.
something wrong.
And it's it's all done very tastefully. And
It is.
when if there's doubt about that, I ask you to look at an issue of Playboy and then look at an issue of Hustler.
Hmm.
The women are
Yes.
typically degraded. They're on in Hustler. They're it's it's kind of gross. Um,
Yeah.
and you know, it's not the respectful tone that Playboy ended up promoting. And
Hmm.
it's, but I mean, all of those other ones, Penthouse, Bob Guccione and Larry Flint, took their cues from Playboy and said, well, I don't think that it goes far enough in depicting that sex is okay. Let's show the girls with their
Actual
legs
sex,
wide open and put in actual intercourse in the magazines and things like
which
that.
was suggested to have many, many times.
Right, but he refused to do it.
Right. Because he had a standard. He
Right.
had a standard that he wanted for his publication.
And that
Whether you
standard
agree
kept
with it or not.
him, yeah, that standard kept selling even with
Mhm.
Penthouse and Play and Hustler and the scads of other magazines that cropped up uh, that took, if only, their lighting cues from Playboy and their general concept, not the respect or the class, but it it opened the floodgates for people to begin to express themselves in a less prudish manner
Mhm.
and started to kick at the puritanism of America. And
And break open the idea that that women could have a life for themselves.
right, exactly. It's and people will object to this as well, but it wasn't objectification, it was liberation. In as much as the white feminism movement of the 1970s with Gloria Steinem and things like that were
Made a stand.
right. So, and you know, they used skin flicks and especially Playboy as a means of saying, look, we can be independent, we can be sensual, but we can still also be intelligent and hold regular real jobs and work side by side with men and all of that. That it was really revolutionary, and he did a lot to move culture away from the sanitized version of what it was up until then, is in the media anyway. And he was 91. He lived an incredibly full life, and
Yeah,
um,
probably more full than any man you could think of.
probably, and that's not just the amount of women he slept with, which should never be a benchmark, but just the way that he utilized, uh, the way that he exploited a niche market and turned it into a multi-million billion dollar industry, with the help of his wife and his children later on. I believe his first wife, they parted amicably and she still worked on the magazine for decades.
Yeah,
And his daughters worked on the magazine, and it was a way of just not it was a way of undirtying sex that
yeah. That's
in
that's the key. Yeah,
in
that's the
in a
one thing.
in
Yeah,
a more taking more of a European mindset, away from the Puritan founding of the United States that had always tried to sweep this kind of stuff under the rug and say, well, this isn't happening. People don't do anything until they're married.
yeah. That whole thing where you keep your clothes on until you get married and until you lock the door and you lock the door and you turn your lights off and
Right,
you
right.
hide yourself in the dark. That
And
whole
the
thing.
and the old
That whole
college where if you were with your significant other in a dorm room, there was a chaperone. The lights had to stay on. You had to keep at least one
and the
foot on
door
the
was open.
floor. And
Yeah, and the door was open.
right, or in the common rooms, you had to keep one foot on the floor. That just meant that people got more creative and they wore stuff that they didn't have to take. They wore stuff that they could take off over their heads. But
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like
This whole
my
that whole thing. That whole. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it's my mother told me stories. She went to the University of Temple. She went to Temple University in Philadelphia, and like you could just see on like a Friday or a Saturday night that there would be feet on the floor, but it wasn't accomplishing what they were hoping it would accomplish.
Yeah.
There was still nookie happening. There was just they were following the rules too. I mean, feet were on the floor, but they
Yeah, and
weren't
that
they
whole
weren't
thing
leaving
goes
much room
back.
for Jesus. I'll say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um,
That whole thing, it goes back. Yeah, it goes back to something I remember my father once told me. He said, "People don't want to be told what to do."
yeah.
And you go back through history. You go look at prohibition when this experiment in good behavior.
Hmm.
What did people do during prohibition? They drank.
They bought bootleg
They
hooch.
they found a way to drink. Okay, you can't tie people down.
Right.
Okay, you can have your opinions about it, but you can't tie people down.
Right, right. If
And
it's not for you, don't do it. Don't
right,
tell other
right.
people
If you
that they
don't go
shouldn't
that
do
way,
it
don't do
because
it.
you don't like it. It's
This whole thing that he helped set off, and I compared him to Elvis in the sense of relaxing that whole halcyon kind of
mhm, mhm, mhm.
sponge clean society. And when you go back and you look at that and you see how they were all, you see how the society was. It was kind of ignorant, and they weren't people weren't educating themselves because the books were all locked up.
Right. It was
You know,
Pleasantville.
people always say to this to me how fabulous the 50s were, and I always say, well, the 50s were fabulous if you were a white male.
You're right.
If you were
Right.
black, or if you were a woman, or if you were gay, it was you were basically locked down
Right.
into a
It was
particular
it
place.
was it was a world of no limits as long as you were a straight white male.
Right. And you could do whatever you wanted.
Right. Right.
And the 60s were a great time of overturning those things.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody after that wanted a revolution for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whether you were black, whether you were a woman, whether you were gay, which they're still fighting for their
Any
rights.
well, so
Women
are
are still fighting for their rights.
and so are black people. Um,
And so are black people.
it started to tear down the illusion that there is a gender or a an orientation or a ethnicity that was better.
Yeah.
It started to pull that down and it started to equalize. Um, and a lot of people will say, well, it was objectification of women, and initially, I'm sure it started off, they bought the magazine to look at a naked woman that wasn't their wife, or see, you know, to masturbate or whatever. But it started to break down a lot of barriers.
And
He's
bring about a healthier attitude towards sex, which I
right,
really
right,
think is one endpoint you really wanted to make.
right.
A
He started
healthier attitude towards
featuring
sex.
he started featuring black women as the centerfolds, as um, saying that it was okay. It was spitting in the face of the old miscegenation guard, and like, oh, you can't procreate with another ethnicity, with another race. And it was bringing, it was saying that beauty is universal, and
Right.
that we're all human. And it's it's a fascinating thing that when you look at, the cultural taboos and the social mores that were disrupted and ultimately changed because this guy put out a magazine every month
Mhm.
is really kind of spectacular. Um,
I couldn't. I wouldn't want to. And I know you're not doing this, but I wouldn't want to limit it to a guy putting out a magazine.
well,
I would say a guy who was promoting a lifestyle that wasn't locked into, you know, you have to do these three things and you can only do these three things. I'm saying
right.
you can have the life you want.
hmm And it was
And
all it
the
was all
great thing
centered
is,
around this publication that
right.
that broke
And he was
down.
trying to put about a social reform,
hmm
a cultural social reform that he was still promoting into his 90s.
hmm
When asked about gay marriage, he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, if we deny gays the right to marry, then the sexual revolution will have been for nothing.
hmm
So, see, he was still promoting it even into the end of his life,
Right.
and still promoting the idea that you can live the way that you want to.
hmm
So that I think is the central place
Right.
of what he was trying to do and what he
Right.
was trying to say.
Right. And so I think with that we will we'll close the doors on our tribute to Mr. Hugh Hefner. He was a visionary, he was a luminary, and
Should
although he
never be demonized.
right he'll we will never see his like again, as they say in the Night's Watch. Uh, although he was about as
No.
far from the Night's Watch as you can get. Um,
I should tell you, I want to mention this right now. As we're talking, as you and I are talking about this, I'm having a debate on Facebook with people who absolutely hated Hugh Hefner for his magazine. And it's just been, for the last 12 hours, this conversation has been going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Men and women. And I've told them everything basically that I have told you on this show. But it's just like this conversation that will never end
Right, this
of
magazine's
people
been
who
around
hate
for
him.
64 years as of this
It's been
recording.
around for 64 years. And I'm just thinking, you know, if you
How
look
is it
at it,
still controversial? That's the amazing thing.
and there's all this stuff about, well, he's objectifying women. Well, if you look at it beyond that, if you pull it away from that narrow view of this filthy pornographer,
Mm-hmm.
if you get
Mm-hmm.
him out of that mold, which a lot of people don't want to do,
Right, 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 right.
and pull him out of that mold and look at what he did in the larger scope, you'll see a man who was a revolutionary
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and not just some pornographer.
Right, right,
And I
right.
think that's very important. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I've been fighting for in this freaking conversation that will not end.
I want to remind
But anyway,
everybody that that Jerry lives in the deep South in the Bible Belt,
oh,
and the people
man,
in
let
his
me tell you something. Now, let me tell you something. I've got to say this one more before we close. We just had a Senate primary, and the man who won is
Oh,
one of the most conservative troublemakers
you know, I read
I've
about this
ever seen
guy
in my life. And
that he would
just
actually, if he's
driving me
elected, he
crazy.
would say that he would go to the Senate to make sure that God's law is not placed above the Constitution. I'm like, wait a minute, what? No, 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 no.
Again, this is what the
This guy got
social
thrown. This guy
revolution.
got thrown off the Supreme Court bench in Alabama twice for
Yeah,
using theocracy instead of constitutionality. It's like,
and now he's won this, and now he's won the Senate primary, and it is driving me crazy.
and he will likely go to
Um,
the Senate because when was the last time Alabama elected a Democrat?
this is true. Ugh. But anyway, this does tie back to what we were talking about because the
Yeah.
social reform. I have been working against this because you'll notice if you go through history, anybody in history who has ever worked to keep and exclude a race or a class of people historically has always lost,
Always failed. Always failed.
always failed. It is
Uh,
always a losing team.
you're
I don't care
always
what you're.
you're on the wrong side of history when you try to deny rights. And I've always said, and this and Playboy really started this conversation up. I think that you there's no such thing as special treatment when you're talking about civil rights and just
Yes,
rights in
yes,
general.
absolutely.
When you hear people talk about, well, the black people and gay people and they want special treatment. No, the only way that that's special treatment is if you acknowledge as a straight white male, which we both are, that uh, you have been treated special your entire life, because all people who aren't straight white males want as the same treatment that straight white males get. And if you look at that and say, well, that's special treatment, then you're part of the problem, not part
Yes,
of the solution.
yes.
And that is the revolution that Hugh Hefner
For liberals,
started.
if you can't tell.
Yeah, slightly slightly left
Yeah,
leaning, we'll say.
slightly. Yeah.
Uh
And I'm not ashamed of it either.
no, I'm not
Um,
either. I tend not to bring it up because I don't like confrontation, but this
I know, I know.
when you're talking about, and it's we'll get to another thing that I don't often like to bring up in casual conversation when we start talking about God's not dead, um, but it's
We'll talk about it in a couple of weeks.
yeah, in a few weeks here, but it's it's been always been mind-boggling to me, and I likewise grew up in an extremely conservative area. Um, I grew up in northeastern central Pennsylvania, which the common saying for Pennsylvania is that it consists of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and everywhere else in between is Kentucky, and it's true. They call it Pennsyltucky, and it's true.
Yeah,
It's
I love that word. I love that word, Pennsylvania.
And it's true. It is so true. If you venture outside, I live in Pittsburgh now. If you venture outside Philadelphia and venture outside Pittsburgh, it's like you have taken a stark right turn down into the deepest of the deep south. Like deliverance could have happened in my town. Um,
Yeah,
you just got to watch out for banjos. So
yeah.
it's it's I sympathize.
Deep South is not the Deep South is not generally like that. I
N-
can tell you.
I so
It's country, but it's not.
I sympathize with you, Jerry. Living blue in a predominantly red area is
Oh my gosh, you have no idea. I mean,
difficult.
listen, I I believe I fancy myself a progressive. Live the life you feel that you were meant to live, and live and let live. It is something that Hugh Hefner wanted to promote
Right.
more than just
Naked
boobs and
women.
butts,
Yeah.
naked women. And it's a life that you wanted to promote. If you if as long as you are not hurting anyone, as long as you are not repressing anyone, live the life that you want.
Right.
That's all he was really. I think that's really what he was trying to
Mhm.
promote. What he was
Mhm.
trying to say, and that's the legacy I think that should be left behind,
Absolutely.
more than just pornography.
Right.
He was the right man at the right time.
Right. Exactly. And so with that, I'll say again. Rest in peace, Hugh Hefner. Uh, I hope you died the way that you lived, probably on your back. Um, so that does it for this special edition of the Pod Bay Doors. As always, I am Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, with my intrepid co-host, as I often say, Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com and ArmchairOscars.com. You can find me on Twitter at TalkMovieToMe1. You can find him on Twitter at ArmchairCMA. And you can find all of the episodes of the Pod Bay Doors, including this one, on our webpage, www.thepodbaydoorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can also find us. We have stopped squatting on our Cave of Wonders podcast YouTube page, and we've set up our own Pod Bay Doors podcast page on YouTube. Don't get confused by just Pod Bay Doors. That is a podcast, a YouTube podcast that deals specifically with Las Vegas. That's not us, which we didn't know about until I started trying to find out how to get the YouTube page up and running. uh,
That is
so,
news to me. I didn't know that.
but this being the fact that that we are now 10.5 episodes in, this being the half episode, or actually this would be our maybe our 11th or 12th episode, because we did have that other half episode on Gone with the Wind. Uh, it's too late to
11 and
change.
a half.
So it's too late to change. So um, bear that in mind when you're looking for us on YouTube. And you can find us through the Cave of Wonders podcast page as well. We thank you very much for bearing with us on our Hugh Hefner revolutionary tribute, and thank you very much. And the Pod Bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.